Welcome to the CocoKids Playbook, a podcast by CocoKids. I'm John Jones, Executive Director of CocoKids. All right, well, welcome. Today we're with Anna Powell, who's the Associate Director for the Center for the Study of Child Care Employment at UC Berkeley. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's you and I've worked on a couple of projects, and it was fun. We were just commenting on it's nice to see each other in person versus on Zoom. So much work is being done on Zoom. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yes. Over a period of years.
Years, yes. So let's start there. Tell me a little bit about, or tell our audience and everyone about the Center for Child Care Employment.
Certainly. Well, we were founded in 1999 by an early educator named Dr. Marcy Whitebook. She looked around at her colleagues, fellow people working with young children, and felt that we needed to have research to go along with the stories that educators were trying to tell. They were trying to tell legislators. They were trying to tell folks who run agencies at the state level about the issues within the field. And they felt, you know what, we need to have research to back us up. So that was the purpose that this center was formed for, was to bring data and rigor and all those things to back up those stories. And today we continue to have that mission. We've grown a lot since she got us started, but we remain committed to this public early care and education system as the vision, where the people who perform this work of caring for birth to 5, we want to honor their expertise and ensure that the system that supports them gives them living wages, worthy wages, as Dr. Whitebook called them, as well as a high-quality job that they can continue to come back to over the course of their career.
Okay, well, let's start there, the wage issue. So there's several issues around childcare, and I can tell you as a parent, there's nobody I valued more than my childcare provider. So it gets confusing when you hear stories about people saying, well, they're not valued or they're not making as much. And so that's a good question, is why do you think that is?
Absolutely. This is the great conundrum of early care and education. Why is it that it can be so expensive and it can eat in as much as half of a single parent's budget in California? And at the same time, folks are earning so little to be performing this work. So obviously, no one is coming out on top in this scenario. But why is that? Well, it really goes back to our history of treating it as a private issue for a family to take care of. It's also because it's women's work, so we're not going to design a system that's going to ensure the people doing it are getting paid well. And because this has been treated as a private issue, that means it's not funded fully by the state. Instead, or the feds, I should say. Instead, we have a patchwork system where there's some funding coming to these people over here, some funding coming to those people over there, but nobody really takes ownership of having a coherent set of options that are fully paid for and available for people the way you might in other countries. Now, I'm not an expert in how other countries do it, but I can tell you that here in California, this piecemeal approach that we have means that most care is still just paid for by parents. So inherently, that means it's going to be born out of their budget. And when it goes into the program where their child is served, it has to get spread across really a lot of people's salaries, because young children, if you've met a young child, you've seen they are great at getting into trouble. They need to be watched closely for health and safety reasons. So we have to have quite a number of adults at the program where they're working. And so that means those salaries are going to be low, potentially as low as possible to minimum wage, and that it still will end up being quite expensive to the parent who's paying that cost.
And I always think about the investment, when you compare it to public school, but people forget in public school, it's one teacher for 30 kids. You can't have that in an early childhood program. I used to run a program and we had a 1-to-4 ratio. So that was a big driver of low salaries because we had to have so many people on staff, but that was for kids with special needs. But for most childcare providers, they still have to have a high, teacher to child ratio, and even more so for people caring for infants. That ratio is even bigger. So does that drive the cost down? Because I hear infant care is even more expensive than what you pay for a 2 or 3-year-old or child entering preschool.
That's exactly right. So the younger the child, the fewer of them you can have working with an adult. So the way that a child care program will typically do it is they actually try to keep that cost low by evening out what they charge the preschool parent and the infant toddler parent. So, yes, it's more expensive, but even that price is probably underselling a bit what it costs to serve an infant just because of how if you only have 4 and you can only charge, let's say, 15,000 for a whole year, and that has to cover way more than just the salary, then you can see how pretty quickly that's not going to be super viable for a wage.
Are you involved in any initiatives that can help address the issue of wages?
Absolutely. Well, listeners may be excited to know that here in Contra Costa County, there is already movement and experimentation with addressing this issue head on. And I say head on because we could just try to provide more dollars for the ecosystem as a whole, but maybe it doesn't go into improving wages. Maybe it goes into improving a facility or to improving training. So sometimes if you want to course correct and stop this problem of wages being kept low for structural reasons, you have to find a way to directly improve pay. And so there's lots of fits and starts of this happening around the country, but the state has not taken action. So Contra Costa saw this and thought, we don't need to wait for the state to take an action to improve wages. We have an opportunity. We have Measure X, a local initiative here that is in our county that can be used for this purpose. So right now, about 120 educators are receiving monthly payments that top off their wages. And instead of giving folks, oh, here's $200 at the end of the year, thanks for your service, that's what we did 10 years ago, right? First Five Contra Costa, CocoKids, and the other local leaders work with the Board of Supervisors to try something different, where we're not just going to do lip service with a small check, we're actually going to try to change fundamentally the participants' economic well-being. So this is an example. It's called Boost. There are other counties in the Bay Area that want to follow this example and expand. For example, Sonoma County is moving in the direction of creating an initiative. And we, myself and the center, are looking at these different programs and really excited to see what they will yield.
Yeah, I think you're going to get a call from Alameda County
I know.
also because I shared some of this information with
Mhm.
one of our providers organizations over there, and they're pretty excited.
Yes, they should be. Alameda County is also in the mix. San Francisco City and County, of course, has a long history of local investments, but these are really kind of the leading edge of addressing low wages in childcare.
Well, I'm excited to hear what our outcomes are because I know we're, what, about 18 months out,
That's right.
and we'll find out what happens then.
Exactly. We'll come back and talk about it.
Okay. So I know a lot of providers, even though we say childcare, there's
Hmm.
a very strong distinction between babysitting, childcare, and early childhood education.
Hmm.
And I think most providers, especially family childcare providers, align themselves more with early care and education. So for someone who is looking for childcare, what are they really looking for? What are the what is what are the signs they're looking for when they're looking for a more educated
Hmm.
environment for their child versus someone who's just going to keep their child safe?
Absolutely. So there is the way the parents think about it, they all kind of want the same thing. They want their child first to be safe and cared for. But when you're talking about going beyond that, they also want a quality experience. They want to see learning and child development taking place. And perhaps they also want other things like language, the language that they speak in their home being used. Maybe they want to see foods that their family would appreciate eating being served to that child. So there's so many things that happen in a child care program that a parent might look for. And many of those you could call some care and some
Mhm.
education. But the fact of the matter is, it all gets woven together. And so this is why, as you picked up on, many folks have really latched on to describing themselves as early care and education to try to communicate to the world that those things are linked and you really can't pull them apart fully. Also, learning looks like different things at different ages. In a kindergarten classroom, it might look like writing something and memorizing letters and the sounds that they make. But for younger children, it might look like moving things with your hands, manipulatives that they're often called. For example, learn early signs of counting or putting groups of objects together. So when a parent sees that, do they think, wow, that's learning? Or do they see, my child's playing with blocks? Well, both things are happening there. So this is part of what I think folks are trying to communicate when they talk about early care and education to describe what they do.
Yeah, I know 30 years ago it was when, hey, I may have my dates wrong, but when my child was young, that's when the information came out about brain development and how much a child learns just between 0 and 5. And if you weren't taking advantage of that time, your child was going to be living with you for a long time. So, um, let's talk a little bit more about the workforce. What are you seeing in terms? You mentioned earlier it's predominantly women,
Hmm.
and I'm assuming that's because our culture really doesn't incentivize men to enter this field. We don't see ourselves as nurturers, and it gets pushed off on women real quickly. And then I also noticed that in your studies, especially particularly here in Contra Costa, that a majority of providers, childcare providers, are women of color. So, what can you tell us in terms of why is it predominantly women, and there's not really an entry point for men? And why is it so predominantly women of color?
This is a really essential issue for folks to understand. Uh, You're right. The people who do this important work are overwhelmingly women. We're talking about 95 to 99%, depending on the point in time we measure. And in every state, it looks a little different in terms of the race and ethnicity. But here in California, Latinas are the kind of beating heart. The largest number of educators are Latinas. And they play this role, first of all, because many families with young children themselves are Hispanic. So there may be some alignment. If my own child is going through this, I'm
Hmm.
drawn to working with children. And that's what we know in the case of family childcare, right? When you open a business in your home, one good reason to do that is you can watch your own child at the same time. So that's an entry point that kind of naturally lends itself.
Okay.
Additionally, uh, people are aware of the pay that they're going to get for a job that they can consider. So a man who may feel, I have to be a breadwinner, he's already socially conditioned to avoid care oriented work. But
Hmm.
if he sees that he can earn more at a fast food restaurant, because California has a $20 fast food minimum wage, he's highly likely to listen to that voice in his head when he thought about, oh, would I actually like working with kids? He might think, and well, anyone might think, I might like to earn $20 an hour first. But there's definitely this combination of the social piece, the economic piece, and then just the opportunity piece that comes into this. But I think it's important to note that the that our Latina educators today, they also really reflect the children in their care. So it's not just that sometimes they have a child of their own, but really we know that around half of all children under 5 in California are Hispanic. So that's a real area of alignment and strength where they can easily communicate with parents if the parent is concerned about their child, and they can even do bilingual instruction if that's something that their program is focused on.
Okay. And is there a incentive for families to keep their kids within their own communities also? Is that might be a reason why uh, predominantly, not necessarily predominantly, but why women of color are providing because they're keeping children within the communities that they're already serving.
Certainly, I think it goes both ways in the sense that, we talked about how important having your child be safe, and safe can mean a lot of things. And one is having just absolute trust that you're leaving with a person that will care for them and be there for them. And of course, there's kind of safety in feeling that you have a shared personal experience with the caregiver. And if you live in the same neighborhood, even better. People usually find care either near their home or near their job. So that right there would be another way that reinforces this dynamic. But also, the people who go into this work, they really are passionate about working with kids. But of course, there might be some additional emotional impact that you have for caring for children that are going through something similar to what you did growing up that can really reinforce your sense of connection. So we always hear from educators the sense of reward and passion that they feel for doing this job and how that is essential to them as professionals.
Okay, how does the tenure? How long do people stay in the field?
Oh, that's a great question. So some people try it out for a year or two and say, this job is really hard and I don't think it's for me. And that's okay. Not every job is for everybody. But we know that folks can and do stay for decades in this work. And the easiest evidence of that is to look at the family child care providers. One, because they're the easiest to see from the public data that's out there in terms of they are tied to their program. They are their program. So we know, hey, you opened in the year 2000. That means you've been going for quite some time now. Um, but yeah, they can go for 20, 30 years. Sometimes we survey educators who've been at this for 50 years. So there's
Wow.
this whole range that you see in there. But we cannot discount that turnover that happens, especially in young people, among young people that are just getting started. We need to help people stay with this work when they're drawn to it, if they have that desire. And that's, I think, where we fall down.
Okay. I notice a significant number of people who enter the field as a assistant in a classroom or assistant in a family childcare do continue on with their studies because there's a large percentage that already have their associate's degree, bachelor's degree, or even master's degree. So what tends to happen as people, is there a ladder for people to follow up? And then does it change significantly at any point? Like with in California, we have our universal preschool, so it's TK. When
Mhm.
are there any people in the workforce and moving up the ladder in that way, and childcare is just like their entry point into the field.
Definitely. So the starting point that you kind of mentioned, such as being an assistant in a family childcare program or in a, center-based childcare program, the barrier to entry is usually pretty low. You may not need to have a degree, but like you said, people often do anyway. But what is less common is that someone at age 18, they enroll in a 4-year program. They go and do that. They go on and get their master's, and then they start working with young children. No, usually people do it as they go, as you were kind of getting at. And so it's very common to see early educators as what we would call a non traditional student, in that they won't get it all done at one time. And therefore, we as people who think about systems need to honor that and say, these are lifelong learners. So let's make sure that our coursework that's available, our supportive programs acknowledge that and recognize people are probably going to keep working while they're learning because they can't afford to kind of stop the clock and go to a degree full time. But to your point about advancement, yeah, you can start with very, minimal or a lot of education, but to go to a more senior position or perhaps a better paid position in a state preschool program, then yes, there start to be more and more requirements and going beyond an associate's degree, potentially through to a bachelor's degree program. Those do help you unlock more options within the field.
Okay. So, going back to some of the issues you've identified, one that's in the news right now is just the issue of immigration. A significant portion of our childcare workforce are not necessarily born in this country, but they're immigrants to this country. What would be the impact with current policies effect on our childcare field? I know we already feel like there's not enough slots or enough spaces or
Hmm.
enough people doing the job. It seems like there's going to be a huge impact. I think your 24 study had about what 24% of our workforce.
That's right. It depends on which part of the workforce you look at. We have some children who are going to public schools and receiving care in the form of transitional kindergarten, and their teachers are usually born in the United States, 9 out of 10 times, let's say. But if you're in a preschool program, it might be more like a quarter to a third were born outside the country. And actually, our most recent data on the state shows that almost half of our family childcare workforce was born outside the country. Now, I want to make clear I'm not commenting on their status. We consider that pretty sensitive, so we don't collect it. So this is really a mix of people who came here through different means. But to get to your point, what is the impact of this current climate? Well, immigration enforcement has a huge drag on everybody's childcare, not just for the people who themselves might be immigrants. We know that immigrants are working everywhere in childcare, given their numbers. And so if they were to be forced out of their jobs or forced out of their homes, even worse, that absolutely would lead to a huge reduction in the availability of care. Childcare programs can't just say, oh, so and so's not here today. Still bring your child. There are very intentional laws that say you need to have those adults there every day. And so if they can't quickly hire and replace, they might have to close that classroom or they might have to remove some of the spaces. So this could be catastrophic if there were to be some kind of huge change. Um, but kind of going beyond that, though, we talked earlier about the alignment between the personal background of educators and the children in their care. Most children here who have immigrant parents are themselves citizens, right? So while those children, their status may not be threatened, their family is facing this climate of fear and negativity, and that can leave its mark on the child's development. It's a form of trauma, really. And it's a trauma that can be shared at the community level and really have these ripple effects. But the last thing I'll say, when I said it hurts everybody, it's not just because care can get less available if immigrants are forcibly removed from communities, but it even has been shown in a national study, not my work, but very compelling work, that shows that it can actually reduce employment overall, even among non-immigrant workers. It just creates a drag on employment in childcare. And so we really cannot afford to tinker with these jobs and this system in that way.
Yeah, I just saw a recent study, and I wish I could remember who put it out, but it was just about the gains in the gross domestic product. Just having people to work and earn and spend, what that really does. And if you took childcare out of that, you're taking out a significant portion of the workforce, and you wouldn't get that return
Mhm.
on funds. So it's like whatever gets invested into childcare really comes back tenfold to all of us in
Mhm.
terms of taxes and what else is there other than taxes? But
More economic activity.
yeah,
So, absolutely, yeah, there's so many ways in which childcare impacts our economy, and it does so in the near term and in the long term. So, you probably heard research about the long term. When children grow up, they create, lots more. They have better jobs. They're able to avoid incarceration. They have healthy kind of career trajectories, and that leads to more economic activity that benefits them and all of us as a whole. But we don't have to wait for children to grow up to see our economy benefit, right? Parental labor force participation, which means you're working or you're trying to, right? That goes up, especially for women. Women need to be working, even if some of them would prefer to be part time. The reality is they are also breadwinners a lot of the time. And so they're hoping to have childcare to enable that. So they're going to work, they're adding to our GDP as a state. And also then those businesses affect other business, and it just ripples throughout the economy. But you're right, a lot of it really comes back to this starting point. If the care's not there, then none of that can take place.
yeah, I always feel like we've lost our attention span. Nobody wants to wait 20 years to
Right.
find out. We want to know right now. And I always blame MTV. It shortened our attention
Uh-huh.
span real long for younger people. MTV used to be a really cool channel. All right. So, in our closing comments, if there was one thing that would make the greatest impact on strengthening our childcare industry, in your opinion, what would that
Mhm.
be?
Hitting me with the tough question, John. I would say I'm involved with a project that is called Abundance. And it's this idea that we can have the essential things that people need here in California or even locally in Contra Costa County. And part of it is about the mindset of deciding we can organize the resources that we have, we can organize the systems through which we govern to design for that. We don't have to accept scarcity as it is right now. We can acknowledge we kind of created this scarcity by adding little bits here and there, by deciding that this is a private problem and not a shared responsibility. And I think if we can collectively commit to that change in mindset, it unlocks the potential, right? People want to go in this work, but then choose not to because A, B, C. People want to build a new facility, but then they can't because they didn't have the loan, the time that they needed, right? If we can intervene and stop this kind of outflow of talent, of resources, of ideas, the options are there, the good ideas are there. We just need to follow through and decide we're doing this. We're doing this here in Contra Costa, we're doing it in California, and we can get out of our own way.
Wow, that was great. You running for office now?
No
Okay.
thanks.
All right. Well, thank you for coming in today. Today we are joined by Anna Powell, the Associate Director for the Center for the Study of Child Care Employment at UC Berkeley. Thanks for coming in, Anna, and I look forward to continuing working with you on several projects that hopefully will strengthen at least what's going on in Contra Costa.
Likewise. Thank you for having me, John.
This podcast was brought to you by CocoKids. Thank you to Letty Cuizan, executive producer, and Faith Donathan, line producer.